Hello, everybody. This is Gilda Ross here, talking to you from the Glen Ellen Public Library. I'm so glad that you could be here tonight. This little different format for us. We're hoping we might do this again in the future, where if families want to come and join us and view this together and have a discussion afterwards. So keep watching the website, glenbardgps.org, for that kind of information. So happy you could be here for this very important program. These are, I will say, my two favorite authors. Ned Johnson, Bill Stixrud wrote an amazingly important book, The Self-Driven Child, The Science and Sense of Giving Your Kids More Control Over Their Lives. They are back now with their brand new book, which is called How Do You Say It? How to talk with kids to build stress tolerance, motivation, and a happy home. This is the 26th year of the Glenbard Parent Series, and we couldn't do it without the sponsors that you just saw on that slide. We ask of you who are listening in tonight to please like us on Facebook, check out our Instagram, tell your sister who lives in Poughkeepsie that she is welcome to join us for these free Zoom events. So coming up in December, we're very excited that we will be welcoming back Katie Hurley. She'll be with us on Wednesday, December 1st at noon and 7 p.m., talking about her latest book, Positive Thinking for Teens. Julie Lykoth-Hames, another one of our favorite authors, stressed that we have to invite Lydia Denworth to talk about her book, Friendship, the evolution, biology, and extraordinary power of life's fundamental bond. That's on Tuesday, December 7th. So I hope you'll come back. You can see some of the upcoming programs there. Amy Morin will return 13 Things Mentally Strong Kids Do. And then David Epstein will be talking at the end of January about his book, Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. So mark your calendar for those upcoming events. The format tonight, I'm going to turn things over in a moment to Peter Monahan, the principal of Glenbard West High School. He will introduce our speakers. They'll speak with us for about 50 minutes. Please let us know about any questions you might have in the Q&A and in the chat. We'll take some questions from our audience as well. And we're looking forward to a lively discussion. And I learned so much from these gentlemen, so it really is a special treat. This will be recorded, and thanks to the generosity of our speakers, it will be shared. So really, really grateful about that. And so without further ado, let me turn it over to Dr. Peter Monahan.
Thank you so much, Gilda. And I so much appreciate all of the work that you do and your great commitment to our district and the communities that we serve. It's an amazing accomplishment, everything that's happened. So our two speakers tonight are very accomplished. And I'd like to just start off by talking a little bit about Ned Johnson, who is an author, speaker, and founder of Prep Matters, an educational company providing academic tutoring, educational planning, and standardized test preparation. A professional tutor geek since 1993 and a battle-tested veteran of test prep, stress regulation, and student performance, Ned has spent more than 40,000 one-on-one hours helping students conquer an alphabet of standardized tests, learn to manage their anxiety, and find the motivation to reach their full potential. Let me take a moment to also talk for just a minute about Dr. William R. Stixrud, PhD, who is a clinical neuropsychologist and founder of the Stixrud Group, as well as a faculty member at Children's National Medical Center and an assistant professor of psychiatry and pediatrics at the George Washington University School of Medicine. He is also the co-author with Ned Johnson of the national best-selling book, The Self-Driven Child, and their other new book, What Do You Say? Talking with Kids to Build Motivation, Stress Tolerance, and a Happy Home. He is a longtime practitioner of transcendental meditation, and he plays in the rock band Close Enough. So we're very thrilled to have these two speakers. I can tell you as principal of Glenbard West High School that these issues that they raise and that they address are central to the success of our students. So please join me in welcoming these two renowned speakers and experts in this area. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks you so much, Peter and Gilda. It's a joy to be here. And it certainly is possible that parenting now is harder than ever. It's certainly possible, given we're in the middle of a pandemic and all we got to deal with. But it's never been easy. In the first year of my practice, going back to the mid '80s, I tested this kid. His mom was a humorist, and she said, we really shouldn't call it raising children. We should call it lowering parents, because it's hard and it's humbling and it's often humiliating. But in any case, Ned and I wrote The Self-Driven Child, which is about how important having a sense of control over their own lives is for kids. And after about a year, the book had been out, our agent said, people love the language in this book that where you share how you talk with kids. Write a book that just has a lot more of that stuff in it. It just makes it easier when parents know what to say. And, it just made sense to Ned and I, because, so many of the families we work with, the parents say, God, I've told him a million times, or I keep trying to get him to see, and they're really frustrated, or I've taken away his phone, I've taken away everything. I don't know what to do. And so, Ned and I have been talking one-on-one with kids for a total, between the two of us, between 65 and 70 years, probably a long time. And so we
live in 5 years for me, Bill, but
yeah, that's right. That's right.
I'm going to do that math.
Right. So, but in any case, we thought, well, we could do this. We in the self-driven child, we emphasize a sense of control, because having a sense of control or autonomy is hugely related to mental health at all ages. And it's hugely related to internal motivation. So we thought that this is really key. And when we started writing a book about communicating with kids and talking with kids, we thought we got to take a step back, because the primary purpose, the fundamental purpose of communication is to build relationship and build connection. And we knew that a close relationship with a parent is about as close as you can get to a silver bullet, protecting kids and teenagers from the harmful effects of stress. And we thought, let's talk about how we do this. And we did these little focus groups when we first started working on the book. And we asked these older kids and teenagers, who do you feel closest to on this planet? And sometimes it was a parent, and often it was a grandparent or a teacher or a coach or an uncle or an older cousin. And we said, what is it about this person that makes you feel close to them? And invariably, they said, they listen to me without judging me, and they don't tell me what to do, which made sense to us, because we know that the keys to building a close relationship with kids are empathy, communicating empathy and understanding, and validation, the idea that your feelings are normal. There's nothing wrong. And so we focused on our first chapter in our book about this close connection through empathy and validation. And Ned, you take over and explain this stuff.
Yeah, and obviously we would like to have close relationships with our kids because they're our kids and we love them. But also it's this close connection, as Bill points out, that protects kids against the stress that seems to be far too big a part of life for so many folks today. It's also, though, by being close that kids will share their problems with us and give us an opportunity to help, as opposed to you don't understand and keeping things away from us. So it's really why that was the first step in our book. And I should point out, what we talk about is that the way that we develop emotional closeness is by sharing strong feelings with one another. We don't share strong feelings with people on the street, only with people we feel safe with. But talking, making a space where it feels safe to talk about strong feelings, when we can do it in a way that's effective, isn't easy for everyone. And so we really wanted to dig in on this. Oftentimes when people bring hard feelings to us, our kids, we jump into kind of natural instincts that may not be as helpful as we want, because simply put, logic doesn't calm hard emotions. Telling someone the solution or explain why they can think about it differently, that's not what calms hard feelings. It's the experience of being listened to and feeling like you're understood. And as Bill mentioned a moment ago, being able to tell hard things to folks and not feeling judged or told what to do. So we really looked at the tools of how do we, hold space with hard feelings, in ways that are really effective to create this closeness. And it's through empathy and validation, and which is simply that I understand why you feel that way, that there's the reason to. Your feelings are valid, even if they might be hard or not helpful right now. And a specific tool is what's called reflective listening, and a modern iteration of this, of wigging. We got this from a wonderful researcher named Ron McGinn, and wigging stands for what I got is. And it's just, you kind of repeat back to people what you heard. And one of the reasons we do this is, one, it can buy us time. We're just like, I don't know what to say. And you're just like, okay, you sort of repeat things back, and it gives you time for your second thing to say. But also, I mean, if Bill tells me a problem, I say, well, let me repeat that back, Bill. So what you're saying is you had a really rough day, and this client was saying things that just weren't nice, and you really felt like they're being unfair, and it really got you pretty upset. Is that about right? Well, to the degree that I was close to where he was, now we're going to get somewhere. And so with our kids, we often have kids, we've all had probably this experience where a kid comes home and something went not so well on the playground or on the sports team, more often in school, and the kid is fit to be tied. I did terribly on the test, and I worked so hard on it. Mr. Johnson put those things on there. He didn't even tell me we were going to be on there. And you as a parent, you're sitting there going, oh my God, that's not the movie that I saw, pal, right? And you're thinking, dude, study. You watch 8 hours of football on Sunday. Are you kidding me, right? Or we start giving suggestions of, well, if you'd study a little bit harder, maybe you need to study different. Maybe we need to get a tutor, or talk them out of it. It's all, dude, come on, it's only one test. You'll do better next time. The problem is, as wonderful as that advice is, it isn't validating, because we're jumping right past the feelings and going to, here's what you should have done, which can oftentimes feel like criticism, or saying you need to think about this differently, like somehow your feelings are wrong. Validation in that situation could be something as simple as, boy, I'd be pretty upset too if I felt like I studied really hard for a test and it didn't go well. Note that I did not say you studied hard for this test, because my observation was that wasn't the case at all. So you don't have to agree with the facts. You simply repeat the facts back, if that sort of makes sense. There's a wonderful story, we think a wonderful story in our book, of a parent who applied this and shared with us her experience with her kids. So we were out in Palo Alto and gave a talk. And the next day we get a call from an email passed on just from a mom who said, I saw your talk. I came home late after the talk and found my 7th grader in tears, and he's just fit to be tied. And he was so upset. And he said, Mom, I'm the weakest point all of 7th grade. And he went on and he was so upset. And normally, I mean, I love this kid. Normally I would have said, oh, sweetheart, we have so many other gifts. It's okay. Or you're going to get stronger eventually. Or I would have said, I'll talk to your coach and jump into problem solving mode. But I didn't do that. I simply repeated back. And I said, gosh, I'd be really upset too if I felt like I wanted to be strong. And if I wanted to be strong and I felt like I wasn't. I can see how that's really hard for you. And it kind of carried on like that. And I resisted the temptation to offer solutions, to offer advice, to try to talk him out of the hard place where he felt like he was. And he kind of dried his tears, and he felt comforted by just being understood. He went to bed, I went to bed. The next morning he comes down to breakfast, and he has a plan, a written plan for how he's going to gain strength. And Mom, will you help me? And he said it was just the most doggone thing where he was able to put things in perspective rather than me trying to talk him into different things. And he had come up with a plan rather than my giving the plan for him. And these are just incredibly important skills. And Bill will talk more about this, that we want our kids to be able to solve their own problems with our help. And we want them to have that stress tolerance, which is really the ability to get bent out of shape, to get upset, and to come back to baseline. And Mom did this beautifully just by using this very basic tool of reflective listening.
What I love about this story, Ned, is partly that some of the things we talk about in our book takes practice. But this woman just heard one talk and just really changed the energy a little bit. Just said, maybe I can help, let's go to bed. And basically didn't try to solve it, and the next morning, things were really very significantly different. I love that about that. And also, just the story you mentioned about the kid who comes home and he didn't really study, he's complaining about it, that they're just much more likely to be honest with themselves and to say, I didn't really study, if we do that reflective listening, as opposed to saying, well, yeah, I didn't like that. So I love that. And also in our first chapter, we talk about other ways to build closeness and connection, like spending one-on-one time. And we're huge fans from the time they're little, scheduling in every week. I need some time just alone with you. That's the way you really get to know people. And we talk about family rituals and movie night, we talk this one way.
I was going to add to that we're really big fans of John and Julie Gottman, who there's relationship experts. We'll talk about them a little bit later in this hour. And they make the point that the way that we develop closeness to people, apart from sharing hard feelings, is by paying close attention to subtle changes in emotion. And as Bill has pointed out, it's that one-on-one time, or it's family rituals where we're seeing each other face to face, not screen time, not phone time. And it's just, because we all live in worlds that move so fast and schedules that are so busy, it can be hard. It can be easy to give everyone in our family that we care about sort of partial attention. And those family rituals of Sunday pizza dinner every week, in that one-on-one time when we can really stop and sort of tune out everything else and really give that close attention to reading the faces of the people we care about. It's just incredibly valuable.
One of the rituals I love the most, Ned, is that the family who the mother drove all the kids to school, and before they got out of the car, they all said, "Go Team Jackson," and they give each other high five.
She was a cool mom. I love her.
So we start out talking about closeness and connection, and then we revisit some of the themes from the self-driven child, but from an angle on talking with kids and communicating. And so one of them is this idea that we introduced 3.5 years ago of parent as consultant. The idea that as kids get older, it makes sense for us to think of ourselves more as consultants to our kids than as their manager or their boss or the homework police. The idea being that our responsibility becomes trying to help them figure out who they want to be and how to create the life that they want. If we take the point of view that a successful life is one you're happy with. And so that we suggest making that shift in part because we want kids. We see so many kids that go off to college and are back by November 1st. They just aren't ready and they don't have enough experience running their own life. And so the three implications of this idea of thinking about ourselves more as consultants to our kids than their manager is, number one, we want to offer help, offer advice, but not try to force it down their throat. Ned has this great cartoon, this dad holding his two sons by the nape of the neck and saying, "Listen up, boys, and listen up good, because I'm willing to tell you this 1,000,000 times." And it's not a very good use of energy to tell kids 1,000,000 times. So we want to offer help, we want to offer advice, offer our wisdom or our experience, but not try to force it down their throats. We want to encourage decision making. And I think that the best message you can give a teenager is that I have confidence in your ability to make decisions about your own life and to learn from your mistakes. And I want you to have a ton of experience doing that before you leave home. And because the decision making is so much of being able to run your own life. And so we start with little kids. You want to do it this way or that way. And then we endorse that decision making as they get older and require it before they go up to college or wherever they go. And the third implication is we want kids to solve their own problems. When a kid brings home a problem, ask yourself, whose problem is it? And remember, it's theirs. And the cool thing is that when kids, no matter what age, when kids are stressed and they try to solve their problem themselves, their prefrontal cortex activates to try to figure out what to do. And when that happens, it dampens down the stress response. So they aren't as stressed. They go into kind of a coping mode. And that's why we want kids to have a lot of experience of being in that coping mode where there's something stressful happening and they're dealing with it. With our support as necessary, we're behind them. But what we want to do is not try to protect them from every conceivable stressor and not try to jump in and solve the problems for them. So we have these three implications, and we want, I was lecturing in Houston a couple of years ago, and I mentioned one of the most elite schools in Washington, D.C., because I just tested a kid from there. And this family therapist came up to me, this therapist came up to me later and said, you know, I'm a therapist at the Menninger Clinic here in Houston. It's a really excellent mental health facility in Houston. He said, we know this independent school in DC really well because so many of the graduates get into the most elite colleges, but they can't handle it emotionally. So they take a medical leave of absence and they come here for treatment. And she said, 201, they just don't have enough experience solving their own problems, running their own life, figuring out what's important to them. They've just been jumping through hoops for year after year. So we love this idea of our role is to help kids figure it out themselves. And so in terms of the language piece, we talk in this chapter about the language of getting buy-in. You know, we just don't believe in kind of blathering on or just being the 31st person to try to get a kid to see the light. And so what we do is we say stuff like, can I make a suggestion? Is there a way that I could help? You know, I've got an idea about that. Is it okay if I run it by you? Or I use a lot, you know, for whatever it's worth, you know, so it's tentative and it's not coercive. And the second part is that we talk about the language of no force. I'm not trying to force, letting kids know we aren't trying to force them. Ultimately, you can't make somebody do something, so you really can't force them. And letting them know, I'm not going to try to force you. I know I can't make you do this, is incredibly empowering. It seems a little threatening at first. You're giving away the goods, but really, it's just acknowledging the reality. I couldn't make you do this, so let's figure out something together. So it's taking force off the table. And, you know, I'll tell you that I'm routinely asked to talk kids into stuff, you know, whether it's taking their medication or whether it's changing schools or working with a tutor or something. And parents ask me, I say, I don't believe in talking kids into stuff, but I'll talk to them about it. So I got a call from a mom 3 or 4 years ago of a kid with ADHD who diagnosed in 2nd grade. Refused to take his medicine until 8th grade. I saw him in 8th grade, and he's in Catholic school. They're applying out to Catholic high schools. So ideally, you do well in 8th grade. He had low C's in all his subjects. And the mom said, could you please talk him to take his medication? The pediatrician met with him last year and had a come to Jesus meeting with him. The kid still said refused. So I said, I'll talk to him about it. So I sat the kid down and I said, look, they said, I don't want anybody. I'm not going to try. I don't want anybody to try to force you to take the medication. If they try to force you, all you got to do is put it in your cheek, swallow, and then go spit it out. I don't want anybody to force you. But it makes sense to me for you to make an informed decision because there are people, a lot of kids your age, the medicine is like turning on a light switch. And I think it makes sense for you to know, am I one of those kids? So I said, I think you got to try it, see what it does, and then decide whether to use it because it doesn't help. You aren't going to use it. If it helps you 20%, it's not worth it. Bad side effects? No way. But if it really helps you, then you can decide to use it or not. And when force was off the table, that this kid decided that day, I want to try this medicine. And I got a call a couple months later from the mom who is saying he's got straight A's. Now this medicine doesn't usually take low C's to straight A's in 2 months, but this kid was really good. He's really smart, really good, potentially a really good student. And the point is simply that when we take force off the table, and I love Ross Greene's line, I'm not going to use the force of my will to try to make you do things. And then we need more skillful ways to try to enlist cooperation. We talk about that in both our books. Ned, we also talk about this non-anxious presence, and you talk about that stuff so well.
Yeah, so this is a chapter from The Self-Driven Child about the reality that things work better from a systems perspective, including brain systems, when the person or people who are in charge aren't overly emotional, aren't overly reactive, because stress is contagious. If I get really worked up, people around me get really worked up. And because a low sense of control is so stressful and undermines, autonomy for our kids, motivation for our kids, their stress tolerance. If I am, and as parents, we oftentimes try to seize more control when we're anxious ourselves, because when we feel a low sense of control, it's stressful to us. So we can tolerate supporting our kids' autonomy, letting our kids have this space to make mistakes, to make decisions, to get better, even if it's imperfect, and not jump in and solve things for them. we can tolerate that better, a lower sense of control at our end. If we ourselves are less anxious, when we get more anxious, we want to jump in. Part of the reason we're so concerned about that, we're so interested in this idea of a non-anxious presence, is our experience in talking, 26, 27 states now across the country, is we see anxiety everywhere. I mean, we thought that our corner of the world, here in DC, had sort of cornered the market on stressed out kids and schools, and we were wrong. I mean, we're in Seattle, and we see second graders in full school refusal, and in Texas, fifth grade boys who are falling apart because of the pressure of doing well in grades and math, because they know how important it is for college. And just everywhere we look, we see this. And on the one hand, it's harrowing. On the other hand, it also means that it can't be, well, it's this parent or that family or this, or this school system. These are really, we're not so fond of, pandemics or epidemics, but these are pervasive phenomena. So the question is kind of, well, what are the pervasive phenomena? What's going on if kids seemingly are getting a drip feed message of be very afraid? Be afraid, that everyone's sort of afraid everywhere. And some of the things, some of these things are forces that are economic forces and obviously medical phenomena, but some of them are also what parenting in America looks like today. And this isn't to point fingers, but just things for us to reflect on. One of the things that we do in conveying to kids to be very afraid all the time is by constantly checking and checking and checking, and so we check their grades, by the day, by the hour, by the class, that kid 92.7, like, really, to point, does anyone care? Or by where they are. Well, you were 7 minutes late. Well, why did you stop at 7-Eleven? All these tracking devices, which are intended to keep kids safe, but give also unintentionally, I think, give kids the message of, the world is so scary. I'm so worried that I have to know where you are every moment of the day. It's also through our language. Well, I'll say really quickly about the tracking and control. There's a great researcher named Jessie Borelli out of UC Irvine, who studies parental over control. And her observation is that we over control because it's tied with stress. And so this really clever experiment, she brought in a bunch of 12, 13-year-old kids, put them in front of a digital puzzle in trying to move things around and make a shape or whatever. And they had a parent there, in this case it was moms. And moms were just there with, for moral support. You're doing great, Ned, keep at it, you'll get it. But with one instruction, which was don't tell them how to do it. Don't tell them how to solve it. Don't move it left, move it right, whatever. The puzzle looks easy. It's not. Kids think they're going to crush it easily. They don't. Parents are going to be proud, and then they're concerned. And so the kid starts out fine, but then gets frustrated the harder this, the longer this is taking. And as they get frustrated, they kind of get distressed. And they can tell this because the kid has a heart rate monitor on. You can see the pulse going up and up and up and up. And so does mom. And as her kid gets stressed, because she loves her kid, her stress goes up as well. And so they're both going up. And eventually all the moms, they can't take it because they feel helpless. They feel hopeless. They're sitting there on their hands, biting their tongues, not helping when they're wired to want to help. And they all eventually start doing these, no, okay, sweetheart, over to left. No, you're left. No, try turn it this way, right? And they break the only rule that they have. And in doing so, their stress comes down because their heart rate, they now feel a sense of control, which is what the self-driven child was all about. The problem? Their kid stress continues to go up. And so the zero-sum game thing is a bit of a challenge. Now, all emotions are contagious. So just like a stressed out kid will stress out a mom and mom will stress out a kid, so is calm. Turns out, we found this out, calm is contagious is a mantra of the Navy SEALs. So we're thinking, well, if calm is also contagious, wouldn't it be a great thing if we as parents work to be more non-anxious, because we can be then a stress sponge for our kids and help them be less anxious. So how do we communicate being a non-anxious presence? Well, John and Julie Gottman, whom I mentioned before, they studied relationships and whether things have kind of a glass half full or glass half empty kind of bent to them, and found that there's this kind of magic ratio of positive to negative words that you kind of want to aim for, you can get away with before things kind of go south. And it turns out that from their 30 years of research in this, you need a ratio of 5 positive to 1 negative word to keep the ship upright. And people have done a bunch of actual neuroscience on this, and they look at the effect on the brain of hearing positive words, love, hope, kindness, what have you, versus fearful words of danger, scary, threat, even the word no, when you're in a functional MRI, this cascading effect of stress through the brain. So we just want to be intentional in aiming to use negative words less and positive words more. And messages that we give kids, things like, things work out. Most of the time, things pretty much work out okay, right? Or I love you no matter what you do, or how hard you work, or you don't have to be good at everything. You certainly don't have to be the best at everything. You just have to be good enough at some things. And then the last thing to sort of be in a non-anxious presence is having practices that pull stress out of us. Certainly this last year has been trying for pretty much everyone that I know, because in addition to all the regular stresses of being a human on this earth and being a parent and we had all the financial turmoil, we had all of the social justice that was traumatizing to everyone, whether you're experiencing it or witnessing it. And we had, that pandemic. And the way that I think about this is that if you don't have as many ways to take stress out of your system as you do put things that are putting stress into your system, things will become imbalanced. And simply put, if you don't have healthy ways to relieve stress, people use unhealthy ways to relieve stress, including substance use disorder, and yelling at other people actually lowers our stress. We feel better, but the other people feel worse. So, and I should say really quick, I had a really interesting experience to try to walk this summer. My 19-year-old son, who's downstairs, he should be in his second year of college, was diagnosed in the middle of July with a brain tumor, and he's doing great. He's chose the right kind of brain tumor, I guess, that's really amenable to treatment. And so we're almost out of the woods. But goodness, I imagined a different plan for his summer and ours. My wife and I take really seriously our relationship, being well rested, exercising, and for both of us, learning from Bill, following his lead, learning to meditate. And at some point, probably a couple weeks into this, my wife said, people keep saying to me, how are you handling this so well? How are you so calm? And part of it, we knew we were in good hands with his medical team. But she said, honestly, I think it's because I learned to meditate. I don't think I would have reacted like this before I did, because I would have been more stressed than I am. And so meditation may not be the thing that you do, but everybody really needs to. And if you don't yet, look to find practices that help take stress out of your system, because when you can be less anxious, it is such a benefit to your kid. And certainly it helped our child be optimistic through this process, because he had watching his parents have every confidence that this was going to turn out well, because it does turn out well most of the time.
Yeah. Ned, I love that message that I love you no matter how hard you work. Mm-hmm. Because so often, I think the parents I work with, understandably, they don't want to give the kid the message that I approve of your not slacking off. Right. So that my approval and my love for you has to be communicated conditionally. And my experience is that it's that unconditional, I love you no matter what you do or say, that's not it. And it's the best message we can give somebody. And I also mentioned that I know this kid with autism and his mom, they learned transcendental meditation together, and it helped them. And the mom was connected and knew a newspaper reporter in New York, had to come do a story. And the reporter asked the kid, so what do you notice from meditating? And he said, TM calms the mind and it calms the mom. Help her be more of the non-anxious presence you're describing, my friend.
And it worked in our household.
Yeah. So we also talk basically pep talks. So it's communicating with kids in a way that helps build that internal motivation or that self-drive that we talk about in our first book. And we as we did in the first book, we lean on self-determination theory, which is this beautifully elegant theory about how you develop internal motivation, that intrinsic motivation where you're doing it because this is important and I want to do it. And it is through having three needs satisfied: for a sense of competence, a sense of relatedness, and a sense of autonomy. And we really emphasize the autonomy piece in the first book, in part because in our culture, we place such a strong emphasis on competence or achievement that everything gets way out of whack. And I think that we were a little disturbed as we were working on the book to see this report from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation that looked at the major causes of anxiety and other stress-related problems in adolescence. And they said the four main causes were poverty, trauma, discrimination, and excessive pressure to excel. And so the idea that the way we want to motivate kids is pressuring them through fear and through worry and or guilt. It's just bad for long-term motivation, for that internal that kids. But we want kids to work hard to develop themselves so they have something useful to offer this world. And using kind of that bribing kids or kind of using you'll never get into college, that kind of thing, it's just a terrible long-term motivator. And I went to a meeting, the same Catholic school I mentioned. Another eighth grade kid, ideally again getting good grades because he's applying out to Catholic high schools, and he's doing nothing. He's putting in very little effort. And the principal at the meeting says, "I've had two meetings with the kid to try to get him to see this. He's got to turn this around. This is a really important. This is a 4-year decision for him where he goes to high school." And I love the principal. He's a great principal. I said, but in all due respect, I don't think it's lost on this kid that if he does better, that he'll have more options. I think also he wants to do the better, and he's tried, and just learning's hard for him. He's had the experience no matter how hard he tries, he doesn't do that well. So what's the point of trying? And also, the more that we make him afraid, the more we tell him how important this is, the more anxious he gets. And we know that the major manifestation of anxiety is avoidance. So he avoids the work, he avoids thinking about it. Because it makes them so anxious. And so, and actually, and I love these people at school because they really, I said, to tell them, it's just not that big a deal where you go to high school. When you're 30, who's going to care where we're in high school? It just doesn't matter. If you can apply to some place, if you don't get in, work hard and apply where you want to go, transfer as a sophomore. And so, and what they found is by backing off all this fear, this kid actually started to work harder, and he actually got into a pretty good high school program that he wanted to be in. But it was changing the energy from fear to encouragement that was really very powerful for helping this kid find his own internal motivation. And we also talk in this chapter about Carol Dweck's mindset theory, which we like in many ways. We talk a lot about the applications of it in the chapter, but we also take some issue with it, in part because Carol Dweck says, don't tell kids they're smart. And I'm a neuropsychologist, and I test kids, many of whom think they're stupid. And I found it very healing and very corrective to let kids know, actually, you're smart. And the language we use in our book, we tell kids, you're smart enough. You're smart enough to do something really interesting in this world. You don't have to be smarter than everybody else. You don't have to be the smartest kid in your class, but you're smart enough to do something really, really interesting and really useful. And I'll also just mention that we talk about the power of offhand comments in motivating kids. And I frequently work with underachievers, with kids who the parents say and the teachers say don't work very hard. But I give them a cognitive test to work on. And when I see them work really hard on it, about an hour later, I'll say, remember the thing I had you do? I noticed that for the first time that a lot of kids would have given up. You stuck with that thing until you figured it out. I didn't realize that that's who you were. And then I'll let it go. I won't say another word. But it's the kind of comments like that we make, not droning on and on, just putting it up, then we leave it. That oftentimes sticks in kids' brains for years. And Ned, you got a great story about this.
Yeah. And one of the things that just occurred to me is that those offhand comments, as opposed to what feels like a prepared lecture or lesson, kind of catch kids with their guards down, right? And sort of, permeates the defenses.
Yeah.
The story that Bill's talking about, so I do test prep, and I'm trying to help teach kids, but I'm also trying to figure out how they think and what their stresses are and kind of what motivates them. So I was working with this girl, a local independent school here in the DC area, who had an older sister who was very classically academic, top student, top college, blah, blah, blah. And this girl really felt like, that's not me, or how can I compete, or that's my sister's terrain. And I, of course, think, well, there's a possibility you get a more than one really capable kid from a given family, but wasn't going to take that exact approach with her. So we're doing some, SAT math reading. I can't remember what it was. And she gets a question right that was pretty hard, not just hard for her, but hard for most people. And I was like, huh. And she said, what? And I said, well, that was pretty geeky. She said, what? I said, most people don't get that right. That's pretty geeky. And I put my head back down. And I see her, she does this for a minute, and she gets this kind of half smile and, puts her head back down and goes back to work. So eventually she, takes an SAT, does really well, and up from her goal, gets into the college she wants to, goes to college, blah, blah, blah. And then for a while, every time she had maybe first year of school, every time she had a break, she'd come back and pop her head, and she's just a great kid. And she sends me this holiday card right in December. Dear Ned, thanks so much. I'm loving college I'm attending. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Thank you so much for your help. I don't think I would have been here without the silly SAT scores. And at the very end of it, she says, and thanks for making me a geek. And it's just that, that power of belief is so valuable. And we as parents, we're really trying to help shape our kids' beliefs about themselves in really positive ways, right? And as Bill points out, sometimes this just a little nugget. For the other one, for me, is I will make a really concerted effort to be very mindful of my language, of what I'm saying about my kids when I'm on the phone, when they are not in the same room with me, but know that I might be listening, because in some ways, if my saying something to them is less powerful than if I'm saying when it's not to them and they're overhearing it, because then that must be the truth, right? It's not delivered to them, it's told about them. So another, try if you think that'll help you. So when we talk about motivation, part of the kind of the next step of motivation is really getting our kids to change, because almost always there's something where we think it could be going better, particularly if you've got kids where things aren't going well. And Bill spends a lot of time with kids who have learning issues and behavioral issues and attention issues. And all of our fears are really not about the present, like are my kids, doing a terrible job in history in 7th grade, like whatever. It's really the fear that a kid who's, sort of getting low C's in 8th grade is going to have a low C life. And it's just scary. I mean, scary because you love these kids, you want them to do well. The challenge is that you can't change people who don't want to be changed. And oftentimes when we try to change, when we use the force of our will to change people, they resist, right? They resist. And then we create conflict. And now as parents, we're not part of the problem, part of the solution, rather, we're part of the problem. So we have low grades and we have family conflict. And we're wondering, how do we turn this around? And one of the ways to turn this around is some beautiful insights by what's known as motivational interviewing. So a couple psychologists in the 80s were doing all this work with problem drinkers. And classically with problem drinkers, Ned, if you don't stop drinking, you're going to lose your house, your health, your job, your spouse, your identity, everything's going to fall apart, and just keep piling on one more, message of fear that's somehow going to change my behavior. But again, it just puts me into denial and I'm not listening to you kind of thing. So the insights from motivational interview are really profound, and they interact in an interesting way. The first is this, that we have a righting reflex. If someone brings a problem to me, my buddy Bill brings a problem to me, I want to help. That's what I'm here for, right? That's what I told him, right? And we do this as parents. We what if you do this? If you try this, or we try to help them think about it differently. But the other important one, and this is where it gets fun, is that people are ambivalent about change. So if you take that kid that Bill was talking about where the grades were not so good, it wasn't lost on him that if he got better grades, that he'd have different choices for high school, that his parents would be less stressed. And gosh, that'd be a good thing. His teachers would think more of him. Maybe his friends would see him as smarter than maybe they saw him right now. All good things. But it could take a lot of work to move those grades. And he might have to play less Fortnite. I'm teasing, we'll talk about Fortnite later. He'd have to work hard at things he doesn't particularly like. For teachers, maybe he doesn't like. And he could work like the Dickens and go from low C's to high C's, which would still be far below the expectations that other people had for him. And then he might actually learn that that's all that I'm capable of. And that's a really scary thing. So any situation where we want to accept that kids are ambivalent and that we want to help. So the question is, how do we do this? So motivational interviewing works with asking open-ended questions, using reflective listening, and then listening for change talk. So this is a slightly dramatic example, but it's a true one, and you can take from it, think on how it would apply in your life. So we have a dear friend who's a school psychologist, high school psychologist, and she caught wind of a girl who was smoking a lot of pot in ways that were, well, smoking pot's never a good idea, but her level was definitely not good. And so she sat down, had an appointment with the girl, and sat her down. She says, "Look, take force off the table. I'm not going to be the umpteenth adult who tells you all the reasons why smoking pot's not such a hot idea. You're a smart kid. You understand that. But however, I am interested in understanding your relationship with smoking marijuana. Kind of what do you get out of it? I'd love to understand what it means for you." And so the girl started talking about, well, I really like the kids I hang out with when I'm smoking. They're really funny. They like me, and that feels really good. And I kind of feel funny when I'm smoking. I'm a lot less stressed when I'm high. And she kind of went on, and our friend, the therapist, kind of repeated things back to make sure she understood it, but really to make the girl feel validated, and waited and just kept going on. Eventually the girl said something like, "It is kind of expensive though." Now this is where the typical parents would jump in and say, "There, you got it, if you'd stop." And she said, well, tell me more about that. Again, another open-ended question. If you had more money, what would you do with it? "Oh, my friend has this really cute pair of shoes. I'd really like to get a pair like those. And I haven't done my hair in a long time. Probably if I had more money, I think I'd probably cut my hair, but right now I don't have the money." And it's easy to put together 2 and 2, but our friend, the therapist, resisted doing that. And she says, "Well, that makes sense," and repeated back. Said, "Well, that all makes sense to me. Thanks for sharing that with me." And she went off, each went their own way. She sees the girl 3 weeks later. She's got her hair done, and she kind of walks up to her and said, "Hey, your hair looks cute. Tell me about that." "Oh yeah, I got it done." "Well, that's awesome. How'd you get the money?" "Well, last week I decided maybe I'd just buy once and I'd smoke a little less, and so I got my hair done. I might get those shoes in a couple weeks too. We'll see what happens." And the final insight of motivational interviewing is that it's so much more powerful for people to articulate for themselves the reasons to change than it is for someone else to lay on them the reasons for change, because again, it brings that defensiveness. And I argue the other side. Or if you give to me really good reasons, but as Bill said, if I feel like they're shoved down my throat, well, obviously I can't use those as reasons anymore. I can't give someone else the satisfaction of that because I fought so hard against them for so long. So motivational interviewing is a very specific type of training, and people spend a lot of time learning to do it well, but the basic insights of it are really are ones that any of us can apply, that we ask open-ended questions. We use reflective listening to make sure we've understood, and then we try to create the space where it's safe for kids to really articulate the pros and cons without our judging them. Where Bill started this talk, so that they can begin the process of finding reasons for themselves to change the place where they are.
Yeah. I remember this counselor saying too, that the girl then started to realize that the more pot she smoked, the worse she did in school, and she wanted to do okay in school. And it's easier for counselors to take this kind of curious, tell me more about it kind of attitude as opposed to your grounded response. But a year ago, I tested a kid who's smoking a lot of pot in the summer. He's a 15-year-old basketball player. And I sent the mom a draft copy of this chapter. It's called "The Language and Silence of Change." And a couple months later, she said, I had conversations with her about what pot did. At first, you talk about how it was less anxious, more fun with my friends. And then eventually, I just listened. I kind of reflected back, and eventually said, "I think it's screwing up my basketball game. I can't practice as hard." And he stopped. And it doesn't always work like that, but it's just a nice tool. And we love this idea that we can help people change if they want us if they want us to help. And one of the other things we talk about, well, the other thing we talk about in this chapter is the new SPACE program. It's an acronym. It stands for Supportive Parenting of Anxious Childhood Emotions. It's developed by Ellie Leibowitz at Yale. And it's a program for lowering kids' anxiety that only works with the parents. And it's as effective in minimizing anxiety as actual treatment is for the kids, for cognitive behavioral therapy for the kids. And the principle basically is that because we're mammals, we're wired to protect and to soothe our young. And if we do all the protecting and the soothing, the problem is they get older, they don't have the experience doing it themselves. They develop very, very low stress tolerance, the ability to function well in stressful situations. And so the point of the space program is that we make accommodations when kids are anxious. So we'll reassure them repeatedly, or we'll let them sleep on our own bed if they're anxious at night, or we'll stand with them at the bus stop if they're anxious about it. And it turns out that accommodations like that, they make kids less anxious in the moment, but they make them more anxious over time. So the space program, we make supportive statements like, I used to think that you couldn't handle the anxiety of when you're worried about robbers at night. So I had to reassure you, time and time again, there's no robbers. And now I realize that I was wrong. I'm 100% sure that I know that makes you anxious, but I'm 100% sure that you can handle it. So these supportive statements. And then we identify the ways in which we're making accommodations, and we change those. And again, it's as effective in lowering kids' anxiety as treatment is for the kids themselves. We have tremendous power by focusing on our own behavior and not trying to change our kids. And Ned, let's say we got probably about another 5 minutes or so. Do you want to?
Sure. Why don't you talk about happiness?
Well,
or do you want to do technology really quick? Well, I'll take 1 minute.
Let's do kind of speed rounds here.
Yeah. So there's in every talk that we gave about the self-driven child, and we gave hundreds of talks, if the first question we got was not about technology, we were always surprised. And so technology, I mean, certainly after reading all the stuff with the whistleblower and all those accounts in the Wall Street Journal, we are even more concerned as parents about screen times and video games and social media for all sorts of good reasons. So we have a chapter in our book called The Hard Ones, talking with kids about sleep and technology. And for let you know, there's script after script after script of kind of a scenario, what we might often say when it blows up and what we can say instead. What do I say in this situation to get ideally to an outcome that's closer to the one that you want. The big takeaway though in all of this is that it's language and an approach, communication style that is collaborative, that's designed to mentor more than monitor, especially as your kids get to be in high school, because there's a wonderful story in there about Fortnite coming through my family's house like a biblical plague. It was a riot. And I'll let you read the story. I told it earlier today at midday, but when we get on other things. But the thing that I realized even then, and I have an ADHD boy who is attracted to screens as people can be attracted to screens. But even then I knew it needed to be something that he struggled with our support, not something that we struggled to control, because even as a sophomore in high school, it was not lost to me that he was 3 years away from going off to some college with our hopes and our dreams, all of our love, and a suitcase full of our money. And if he had not had the experience of struggling with how do I turn this thing off and put it away and say this is enough, when he was under our roof, when we could observe, when we could say, hey, I have a thought on this, when we could offer support, he was going to go off to college and be home, by Thanksgiving, having washed out of college, which you see so frequently. And so for every parent who feels like with their kids about technology, I hear you, I feel it, I've walked this, but we still want to struggle with it and let our kids struggle with handling this. We want to be in this consultative, collaborative mentoring process, not trying to figure out how do I control my kid, because there will be a short-term win and terrible long-term losses.
And we have a chapter in our book. It's called Talking with Kids About the Pursuit of Happiness. And it came in part out of we like the research that's been done on happiness and want kids to know. And also, I was in Houston, the same trip I mentioned before. And I one day I met with these high school kids who are student leaders in student government. And I asked them, how many of you want to be happy as adults? And they all kind of sheepishly raised their hand like, and I said, what do you understand it takes to be happy as an adult? And they all thought, and this one kid said, well, we understand that if we get into a good enough college everything will be set. And I'm going, oh God, how could they be so wrong? And we knew we're big fans of Laurie Santos's work at Yale. She's a psychology professor who lived in residential dormitories with the Yale undergraduates. Was just struck by how miserable they were. You know, they got into one of the greatest universities in the world, and they were still really unhappy, constantly stressed and pressure. They couldn't enjoy being at Yale. So she started teaching this course on happiness. To actually, here's what we know about happiness. And I'll just say that there's a formula that we use, Martin Seligman's formula for happiness. And we suggest, talk to kids about the various aspects of this formula. Talk to them about how important relationships are. Don't just overemphasize their friggin' grades. Talk about how important that the things in your life that really feel meaningful to you, that make life meaningful to you. Talk to them about that. Ask them what's meaningful to them. Talk about your highest values. Talk about the importance of being deeply engaged in stuff, how happy it makes you to see them deeply working on their jump shot or practicing their instrument, doing stuff that they love to get better and better and better. Stuff that we know is correlated with long-term happiness. And so we talk about that. And then, do you want to finish off?
Yeah, and the last chapter in our book is about what about consequences? Because, you know, as parents, we know that the best model of parenting is high love and high discipline, right? You know, kids want to feel that they're loved no matter what they do, but they also benefit by knowing that there's someone who cares about them, who's paying attention, that there are limits, there are guardrails, there's someone paying attention to what's going on. But we want consequences. Well, I'll put it this way. We talk about it at some length in the book that the origin of the etymological origin of the word discipline is not to punish, but to teach. And it's our job as parents to love our kids with every ounce of our being that we can, and to help them learn how the world works. And so we spend a bunch of scripts in there, a bunch of situations, including kids struggling with video games and drugs and everything else, about how we help kids learn from their experiences rather than have them just hide from us. And we kind of end with where we begin of this close connection is just so darn important. Even when we see things that aren't going well, even when we need to correct our kids, we want to do it in a way that shows care and respect, that honors the relationship above all else. Because when things really go south and kids really have problems, and it happens, and if you have one kid where this is going down, I am sorry. But if we want to really help our kids, particularly when things are dark, we need to focus on that relationship so that it's safe for them to bring to us their hard feelings, their really hard problems, so that we can be a source of wisdom, a source of advice, a source of stress relief, and a safe haven when they don't know what else to do or whom else to turn to. Because ultimately, you know, if your kid is in his darkest moment, wouldn't you want to be the person that they come to? So we hope you pick up the book. We really enjoyed writing The Self-Driven Child. We understand. I mean, I got a senior in high school in the room next door, and I know as well as anyone on this call, it is not easy being a parent. And we wrote this book in the hope of giving folks some words, a whole bunch of science, and ideally some of the earned, hard-lived experience, wisdom that we think we have from our, you know, again, 65 years of talking with other people's kids. Hopefully some of that can benefit you as you spend, ideally, the next 65 years of your life talking with your kids.
Well, once again, pages and pages of notes of takeaways. So thank you for that. So we've got some questions here.
We
Can
love
you
questions.
talk about kids that have burnt out by high school?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about that is there are a lot of kids who, I mean, I see this with sports too, who feel like in school, they can't get off the treadmill. If I stop working now, my whole life falls apart. Like, you know, and we are really serious about this idea. And we have a bunch of stories in the book about that you could fail 2 years of high school. You could fail 4 years of high school. And if you thought that was a terrible idea, you could go to a local community college, and as soon as you have 30 credits, you can go to the state university in pretty much anywhere in the country, and you end up with the same darn degree from Michigan or Maryland or California as you did if you started there as a freshman. in the self-driven child, we talk about the Sonia Lupin, who studies stress at Montreal, and the acronym of what makes people stressed with nuts, of novelty and unpredictability, a low sense of control. And she says the single best, if there's a single tool that she thinks from her research combats the effects of stress, it's having a plan B.
Mhm.
It's having a plan B. That, of course, Bill and I want for all of your kids to get nothing but top grades and have all the college choice they want, and to have a life that's never darkened by challenge. But the chance that that is going to happen for everyone on this call is just really, really low. And so, particularly this last year, we just knew family after family of kids who were straight A students who then just collapsed. They crumpled, and they didn't go to A's and B's. They went to C's and D's, and they can be thinking, my life is over. And I'll share this. I mean, I think I shared this, Gilda, last time we were with you about our first book. I went to tiny public high schools, New England and Connecticut, for high school. And I was a top student at a very small and therefore not particularly challenged public high school. And I had the best grade in every class I did because I was a pretty good learner and school wasn't that challenging for me. And it was all good until my father's alcoholism and my mother's mental health and their dissolving marriage was more than my little nervous system could handle. And I went from getting A's and everything to doing nothing, in part because I was 3 months in a pediatric psychiatric hospital. And for reasons I don't understand, nobody, from my parents to my teachers, gave any sense of it's not like this is like there was anything other than this. It is what it is, and you'll get back on the horse. So if you have kids who are burned out, I think that for me the most helpful thing is is Bill was saying before, to lower the expectations. Say it's fine, it's fine. It's because most mental health is changing thinking from I have to I want to. And of course you want to get A's. It feels better to get A's than anything else. But the idea that you have to, it just isn't so. And when we can remind ourselves of that and then help our kids remind them of that, then whatever struggle they're going through right now, if they don't have mental energy for school, it must be because they need that mental energy someplace else. And goodness knows, Bill and I hold fast to it. And I'm a guy who helps people get into college with the stupid SAT. That and if you take nothing away from this conversation tonight, it's this: the most important outcome of adolescence is not where you go to college. It's the brain that you carry away from your family and into adulthood. So Bill said, couldn't give a rat's patootie about the grades they get, so long as they come out of high school with a brain that's healthier.
And Ned, I'll just mention that I see many kids in middle school who are depressed and starting high school, just kind of terrified, overwhelmed. And and one of the points I make is that you can't heal from anything if you're chronically tired and stressed. And the priority then is just as you said, Ned. It's not we got to get this together so your grades are going to count. I tell all the underachieving kids I see in high school, I say, as you said, Ned, you can flunk every single class. And then you can turn that around in two semesters in community college, and nobody cares about your high school transcript. And so we want kids to understand. Part of my job is helping kids. I see kids who are really struggling. I want to help them find how you get from where you are now to where you want to be. And I can see a path. It's different than the path that you are. And one of the things I say a lot to kids are discouraged or they're down on themselves, is I say, I can't take that away from you. However, I see it really differently. If you'd like my angle, I'd be happy to share it with you. And then I get buy-in in that way. And it doesn't feel, again, because I'm somebody that discouraged kids, the more you try to talk them out of it, that they're like stuck doors, or the tighter that they hang on. And when you say, I'm not going to try to take that away from you, but I see it differently.
It's a really good point, Bill. I'm really happy you made that. Bill and I were given a talk a few years ago at a school in a suburb in Virginia. And a mom was asking about her kid who was just wildly perfectionistic and, just working herself, ragged, trying to get grades. And the mom had said, said to her, sweetheart, basically, sweetheart, you don't have to get perfect grades. It doesn't have to be. And the more she tried to deliver that message, which I think was the right and healthy one, the more her daughter responded, but you don't understand, you don't, and I, I jumped in, frankly, foolishly trying to give the mom more ammunition on the path that she was going down, more statistics. And after I went at this for a while, Bill popped in and he said something to the effect of, what he just said. He said, well, one thing you might say is like, I'm not going to try to talk you out of that.